You wake up to the same morning, the same routine, the same clothes, the same version of yourself you have practiced for years. You get ready the way you have been told a responsible man should. You go to work. You handle your duties. You come home and step into the role everyone expects from you. A good partner, a good father, a good son, a good man. And it all looks fine from the outside, stable, predictable, acceptable. But somewhere deep underneath it all, there is a question you keep pushing down because you are afraid of what it might say about your life. Is this really my life? Or is this just the life I learned how to perform? Most men never say that out loud. They bury it under busyness, responsibility, and routine. But the truth stays there, waiting. Carl Rogers spent thousands of hours sitting with people who finally spoke honestly, maybe for the first time in their lives. And after decades of listening, he came to a disturbing conclusion. A conclusion most people are terrified to admit. Many men die without ever becoming themselves. Not because they lack courage, but because somewhere along the way they traded their authenticity for acceptance. So the real question is not whether you are successful. It is not whether you are respected. It is not even whether you are happy. The real question is this: how much of the man you show the world is actually you? And how much of him is a mask you learn to wear? What took your real life away from you? Why is living truthfully so hard? And why did Rogers believe that choosing authenticity can feel more frightening than death itself? We need to talk about that. No man wakes up at 30 or 40 and suddenly loses himself. It starts much earlier, long before you had a job, a partner, or a reputation to protect. It begins in the quiet years of childhood, when you were still raw and unfiltered. There was a time when you spoke exactly what you felt, when you laughed too loud, when you cried without apology, when curiosity moved your feet faster than fear. In those early years, you were not performing, you were simply being. Then, slowly, the world began to correct you. Do not say that. Do not act like that. Be strong, be polite, be quiet, be good. Every correction carried a message you were too young to question. There are conditions you must meet to be loved. There are rules you must follow to be accepted. There are versions of you that make people proud and versions that make them uncomfortable. So you started choosing. You showed the parts that earned approval. You hid the parts that caused trouble. You learned to read the room before you learned to read a book. Carl Rogers called this the birth of conditions of worth, the silent belief that your value depends on how well you match someone else's expectations. At first, it feels harmless. A small compromise here, a little adjustment there, but each time you bend yourself to fit the mold, something true inside you gets pushed down. What began as survival slowly becomes identity. By the time you reach adulthood, the mask feels natural. So natural that you forget it was ever a mask at all. And yet, beneath every well-behaved man, every reliable man, every man who always does the right thing, there is a boy who learned that being fully himself was not safe. That is where the loss begins. If this is your first time here, ThinkMate is where we question what others accept. That's the kind of mind we build this channel for. Subscribe if you want more. Now, back to it. As you move through life, something strange begins to happen. You no longer react to the world from your real feelings. You react from the version of yourself you believe you are supposed to be. Carl Rogers saw this pattern so clearly that he gave it a name. Inside every man, he said, there are two selves living side by side. The first is the organismic self. This is the you that actually feels. The you that knows when something is right, wrong, exciting, boring, draining, or fulfilling. This self is instinctive, emotional, honest, and alive. The second is the self-concept. This is the mental picture of who you think you must be. Strong, unshakable, controlled, successful, approved. Whatever you learned earns you love and respect. That becomes part of your self-concept. Over time, this picture tightens into an ideal self, a perfect version of you that is impossible to live up to, but you try anyway. You push yourself to match it because you believe that is what makes you worthy. Now, the problem: these two selves rarely match. And the bigger the gap between what you truly feel and what you force yourself to be, the more pain you carry. Rogers called this gap incongruence, a state where your inner world and your outer behavior are out of sync. On the surface, you function, you speak, smile, plan, perform. But inside, every action feels slightly off, slightly hollow, slightly wrong. You are there, but you are not fully there. You speak, but the words are not rooted in your truth. You succeed, but the success does not feel like yours. This is why so many men say, "I do not know who I am anymore." They are not being dramatic. They are describing the lived reality of incongruence, a life where the mask speaks louder than the man wearing it. And the longer this gap stays unaddressed, the deeper the crack runs through your sense of self. There is a point in every man's life when he stops asking himself what he truly feels and starts asking what others expect from him. It does not happen overnight. It happens quietly, the way dust settles on a forgotten shelf. Carl Rogers had a simple explanation for this shift. He said a man can choose one of two centers to live from. Either he lives from the inside, guided by what is real for him, or he lives from the outside, guided by what earns approval. The second option is what he called the external locus of evaluation. It means you let other people decide whether you are good enough. You hand them the authority to tell you who you should be, and once you hand that over, your life stops belonging to you. You may not notice it at first. You think you are just being responsible, polite, or mature. But slowly, your decisions shift. You choose a job because it impresses people. You stay silent in meetings because you want to appear agreeable. You hide your stress so no one sees cracks in the perfect facade. You stay in relationships that drain you because you are afraid of disappointing someone. You become a man who constantly monitors the room, who scans for reactions, who adjusts himself to avoid conflict, criticism, or judgment. The result is predictable. You stop paying attention to your own signals. Your gut becomes quiet. Your needs become blurry. Your desires feel like distractions rather than truths. And here is the part Rogers found most painful. When you build your identity on approval, you lose the ability to trust yourself. You stop believing your own feelings are valid unless someone else confirms them. This is how men become strangers to themselves, not because they lack strength, but because they spent so long trying to be acceptable that they forgot how to be real. Living from the outside may keep you safe, but it will never make you whole. When a man spends years living from the outside, something eventually gives out. The pressure becomes too much. The distance between who he is and who he pretends to be becomes impossible to ignore. Carl Rogers saw this moment in countless people. They walked into his office looking completely functional, a stable job, a respectable life, a family that believes he is doing fine, but inside, everything feels wrong, not chaotic, just wrong in a quiet, persistent way that keeps spreading. Most men call this midlife crisis. Rogers saw something different. He saw the collapse of a false self that can no longer hold its shape. It often starts subtly. A man feels tired in a way sleep cannot fix. His work feels like repetition instead of purpose. His routines feel heavy. His achievements feel empty. He looks at his life and feels disconnected from the person living it. Then the cracks widen. Some men burn out. Some withdraw emotionally. Some explode in anger or impulse. Some numb themselves with distractions. Some chase something new, hoping it will make the emptiness stop. But the real issue is not stress, not aging, not pressure from the world. The real issue is the mask. It has been stretched so far for so long that it begins to tear. Rogers did not see this as failure. He saw it as a final warning from the real self, a signal that says, "You cannot keep living this way," a message that pushes a man to turn inward instead of further away from himself. This moment is dangerous because it offers two paths. One is to silence the symptoms and return to the performance. The other is to listen. Many men choose the first path because it is familiar, but the ones who choose the second begin the real work, the work of meeting themselves again after decades of pretending. The crisis is not the problem. The crisis is the invitation. In all those moments when a man feels like his life is falling apart, it is easy to believe something is broken inside him, that he is defective, weak, lost beyond repair. But Carl Rogers discovered something radically different. He found that even in the most confused, exhausted, or hopeless people, there is a quiet force still trying to move them toward what is true. He called it the actualizing tendency, a natural drive inside every human being that pushes toward growth, honesty, independence, and authenticity, not because someone tells them to, not because they want to impress anyone, but because the deepest parts of a person know exactly what they need in order to feel alive. Rogers saw this force again and again in the therapy room. A man would walk in numb, defeated, convinced that nothing in him worked anymore. But the moment he finally spoke a truth he had been hiding for years, something shifted. His shoulders dropped, his voice changed, his eyes softened. It was as if the real self had been waiting patiently for the smallest chance to breathe again. Rogers believed this was not an accident. He believed the real self never dies. It only gets buried under fear, shame, expectations, and years of pretending. The trouble is not that you lack a core. The trouble is that you have been taught to ignore it. The actualizing tendency is not loud. It does not shout or demand. It whispers. It nudges. It pulls you in the direction of what feels right, even when you cannot explain why. You feel it when something drains you, and something else energizes you. You feel it when a decision feels honest, even if it is uncomfortable. You feel it when you stop performing for a moment and suddenly remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And here is the truth Rogers wanted every man to understand. You do not become authentic by adding something new to yourself. You become authentic by removing what was never you in the first place. The real you has been trying to return to the surface for years. Your job is not to create him. Your job is to stop getting in his way. Every man likes the idea of living authentically. It sounds noble. It sounds freeing. It sounds like something a strong man should naturally do. But Carl Rogers warned that authenticity is not romantic. It is disruptive. It changes the balance in your relationships. It forces people to see a version of you they are not used to, and not everyone will accept that change. When a man begins to live closer to his truth, the first reaction he often receives is not admiration, it is resistance. People around him start questioning him. You are being difficult, you are being selfish, you have changed. You used to be so easy to deal with. What they really mean is simple. You stopped prioritizing their comfort over your own honesty. Rogers understood this pattern deeply. He saw that many men turn back to their false self at this point, not because they lack courage, but because losing approval feels like losing safety. For years, you may have been the dependable one, the agreeable one, the predictable one, the man who kept the peace even when it cost him something inside. The moment you begin saying no, people notice. The moment you stop pretending, they feel threatened. Not because you are wrong, but because you are no longer playing the role they built their world around. This is the hardest truth about becoming authentic. You will not only lose the people who never loved you, you will also lose the people who only loved the version of you that served them. But Rogers believed this loss is necessary, because any relationship that survives your truth becomes stronger, deeper, and more real. than anything built on compliance. The cost of authenticity is high, but the cost of continuing to live as someone you are not is far higher. Living authentically is not about dramatic gestures. It is not quitting your job overnight or cutting people out of your life in a single moment. Carl Rogers was very clear about this. Authenticity begins with something much simpler. It begins with telling the truth about your experience. Rogers called this congruence. It means your inner world and your outer world match. Your words match your feelings. Your actions match your values. Your choices match what is real for you, not what looks good on the outside. And this alignment starts in small, ordinary moments. When someone asks if you are fine and you are not. Congruence means you stop saying I am good when you feel anything but good. You do not need to pour your heart out. You only need to stop lying to yourself. When you are exhausted but keep agreeing to everything, congruence means giving yourself permission to say no without apologizing for it. When something feels wrong in your gut, congruence means you pause long enough to acknowledge it instead of overriding it with logic or habit. When you feel hurt, confused, or uncertain, congruence means admitting it privately before you try to fix it publicly. None of this looks heroic, but Rogers believed these small acts are the foundation of real change. Because every time you tell the truth about what is happening inside you, the real self grows stronger. Every time you ignore it, the mask grows thicker. Authenticity is not an event, it is a practice. It builds slowly through hundreds of honest moments that no one else will ever see. And here is the surprising part. The more congruent you become, the less you need approval, the less you fear judgment, and the more natural it feels to be yourself. You do not become authentic by performing differently. You become authentic by refusing to perform at all. As a man becomes more congruent, something uncomfortable begins to happen in his relationships. He starts to notice which connections feel real and which ones depend on his performance. Carl Rogers saw this clearly. He saw that many people do not struggle with authenticity because they lack courage. They struggle because they are surrounded by relationships where being honest comes with a cost. If your value in a relationship depends on being strong all the time, you will hide your weakness. If your acceptance depends on being agreeable, you will silence your opinions. If love is given only when you meet expectations, you will shape yourself to fit those expectations. But that is not love, that is a contract. Rogers believed that real connection can only exist where a man is allowed to show his actual experience, not just the polished version he learned to present. He noticed something else too. When a man begins to live more truthfully, relationships built on his false self start to feel shaky. People who relied on him to always be calm, always be predictable, always be the one who absorbs pressure, suddenly feel unsettled. They are not reacting to his truth. They are reacting to the loss of the version of him that kept them comfortable. But the opposite is also true. When a man starts showing up as himself, the right relationships deepen. Conversations become more honest. Boundaries become clearer. Respect becomes mutual. There is room for real intimacy, not the kind that depends on secrecy or performance. Rogers believed that a man cannot be authentic alone. He needs at least one space in his life where he does not have to pretend. If every relationship requires a mask, a man will forget he ever had a face beneath it. Carl Rogers never described the authentic man as perfect. He described him as alive. A man who does not hide from his own experience and does not twist himself to fit anyone else's expectations. This is the fully functioning person. He is not fearless, but he does not run from fear. He listens to what it is trying to tell him. He is not always confident, but he trusts his own judgment more than he trusts approval from the crowd. He does not cling to roles that no longer fit. He does not pretend to enjoy what drains him. He does not say yes when his whole body is telling him no. He reacts to the moment instead of trying to protect an image. He is willing to change direction when something feels wrong, even if it disrupts his routine or disappoints others. Rogers noticed another defining trait. The authentic man is open to experience. He does not shut down his emotions because they are inconvenient. He does not flee from discomfort because it threatens his control. He allows himself to feel fully, which makes him harder to manipulate and harder to predict. People respect him not because he demands respect, but because his presence carries a quiet honesty. You know where he stands. You know when he disagrees. You know when something matters to him. This kind of man cannot be bought with validation or controlled with guilt. He does not chase status to fill an inner void because he no longer feels empty inside. Rogers believed that when a man lives from his real self, he becomes calm without being passive, strong without being rigid, and clear without being loud. He does not need to announce who he is. His life already does that for him. Carl Rogers was gentle, but he was not soft. He believed in human potential, but he also warned about what happens when a man spends too many years turning away from himself. Most people think the real danger in life is failure or rejection or taking a risk and losing everything. Rogers saw a different danger, a quieter one, a more common one. A man who survives every challenge except the one inside his own chest. He worked with people who looked successful on paper yet carried a private despair. They were respected, productive, and responsible. But they also lived with a subtle emptiness they could not explain. It was the emptiness of a life lived according to conditions of worth. A life shaped by expectations instead of truth. A life where every achievement felt slightly disconnected, as if it belonged to someone else. Rogers believed this was the true tragedy, not dying early, but growing old without ever meeting the person you were meant to be. And he noticed a pattern. When a man refuses authenticity long enough, he does not collapse dramatically. He fades, slowly, quietly. He becomes efficient but joyless, responsible but emotionally absent, present but not really living. He becomes a man who does what he is supposed to do, but no longer remembers why he is doing it. A man who stays busy so he does not have to feel. A man who keeps performing because stopping would force him to face the truth he has avoided for decades. Rogers offered a single haunting question to anyone on this path. If you could no longer perform for anyone, would you still know who you are? Most men cannot answer that honestly. That is his warning. If you never choose authenticity, the world will never punish you for it. But your own life will. You will survive every day, but you will not live any of them. Carl Rogers never offered a checklist for becoming authentic. He believed every man already carries the truth he needs. The real work is having the courage to stop running from it. So here is the question this entire journey leads to. Not who you should be, not who others want you to be, but who you are when the performance ends. Authenticity does not arrive all at once. It shows up in small decisions, in moments where you could lie to yourself but choose not to, in moments where you stop adjusting your truth just to keep the peace, in moments where you say, "This is what I feel and I am not going to hide from it anymore." You do not need applause for this. You do not need permission. You only need honesty, one moment at a time. So ask yourself something simple. Today, is there one small thing you are doing that goes against who you really are? And if there is, are you willing to stop, even once, just to see what happens? Because every man arrives at the same crossroads eventually. Either he keeps living the story that was written for him, or he begins writing the one that belongs to him. If this message reached something in you, do not let it fade. Share it with another man who might be living behind his own mask. Maybe it becomes the moment he finally turns toward himself. In the end, authenticity is not a luxury. It is the one life you cannot afford to postpone. If this made you see the world a little clearer, stay, think deeper. This is ThinkMate.